Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. Today I'm going to look at the real life inspiration for one of my favourite horror films, A Nightmare on Elm Street. This video is part of a collaboration with the Proper Horror Show channel. If you watched my Ghost Watch video, you'll know how this works. I or some other creator investigates the real life stories behind famous horror movies. And then on Horror Show's channel we discuss the movie itself in a long form podcast sort of thing. It's an interesting idea and I was glad to be asked to do another one because I really do love this film and I was happy to be given an excuse to talk about it. So without further ado, let's dive into the real horror behind A Nightmare on Elm Street. For an American movie about a demonic dream janitor, the true story has a pretty surprising origin: Laos and the Cambodian killing fields. Between 1975 and 1979, the communist Khmer Rouge regime led by Pol Pot committed one of the worst atrocities in human history. The Khmer Rouge attempted to create a communist agrarian society. They forcibly relocated millions of people to the countryside and forced them to work on collective farms. This led to famine, disease and death. Mass executions, torture and violence were used to maintain control and eliminate enemies. An estimated 1.7 to 2.2 million people died as a result. Meanwhile, in neighbouring Laos, the Pathet Lao, another communist party who shared similar goals to the Khmer Rouge, also took power, again leading to mass incarceration, torture and death. Many of those persecuted were the Hmong people who had fought for the US-backed Laotian government during the Vietnam War. When the Pathet Lao took power, the Hmong people were targeted because they were seen as having aided the enemy. As you can imagine, life under such terrible regimes would have done some serious psychological damage, so it didn't seem too out of place when refugees escaping to America started having terrible nightmares. These nightmares were particularly prevalent among the Hmong refugees. They claimed an evil presence known as the Da Cho would appear to them when they fell asleep. In an interview, one Laotian man would later describe his encounter with the Da Cho. First, I was surprised, but right away I got real scared. I was lying in bed. I was so tired because I was working very hard then. I wanted to go to school but I had no money. I kept waking up because I was thinking so much about my problems. I heard a noise, but when I tried, I could not move. My bedroom looked the same, but I could see in the corner a dark shape was coming to me. It came to the bed, over my feet, my legs. It was very heavy, like a heavy weight over my whole body, my legs, my chest. My chest was frozen like I was drowning. I had no air. I tried to yell so someone sleeping very close to me will hear. I tried moving, using a force that I can, a strength that I can have. I thought, what if I die? After a long time it went away. It just left. I got up and turned on all the lights. I was afraid to sleep again. The Da Cho does sound very much like your typical sleep paralysis experience. During sleep paralysis, a sleeper awakes to find that they cannot move their body. Then they become aware of a shadowy figure in the room with them. The figure slowly moves towards the bed before climbing on top of their body, inducing a suffocating, smothering sensation. This phenomenon of sleep paralysis appears to be ubiquitous across cultures worldwide. As such, the entity encountered during sleep paralysis is known by many names. The Old Hag is her English name. In Thailand, she's known as Phi Am. In Turkey, they have the Karabasan, the Dark Presser. In the Philippines, she is known as Batibat or Bangangot. Whatever the culture, the details are surprisingly similar. a dark-looking entity climbs on top of the sleeper and suffocates them. I personally have only ever encountered the old hag once, at least as far as I can remember. I was probably around 19 and I was going out with this girl, and her house always gave me this weird eerie feeling. It's hard to describe, it just felt strange whenever I was there. Often when I was sleeping over, I would have really weird dreams, and I remember her telling me that she'd once dreamt of a shadow being coming into the room and trying to drag her out of bed by her feet. Anyway, my sleep paralysis experience didn't involve the usual waking up scenario. I was in the middle of a regular dream and I suddenly felt a weight on top of me, as if someone was lying across me sideways, pushing the weight of their own torso down onto my face. It felt very deliberate and malevolent. I couldn't move a muscle and I couldn't breathe. I must have been gasping for breath and struggling because it woke my girlfriend up. She reached over and shook my arm, and as soon as she touched me, it sort of snapped me out of it and I woke up. There was nothing covering my face that was causing me to choke. It was purely the result of this extremely vivid dream. And essentially, that was my perception of sleep paralysis. A mere reverie, a figment of the imagination. Although disconcerting, it posed no real threat. It was just a dream after all. But here's the strange thing about the Hmong refugees. What started out as simple nightmares became more and more vivid and terrifying. A number of them claimed to be frightened of falling asleep in case the dacho got them, and then it seems she did get them. People started dying in their sleep. Heartbroken family members recounted witnessing their loved ones gasping and writhing in their beds, desperately struggling for breath. Whilst a few were fortunate enough to be awoken by a caring companion, many were not so lucky and their lives were tragically cut short. According to this news article, the first documented case apparently occurred in Orange County in 1977 when a healthy young man named Lee Dower died in his sleep. Joanne Gill, then a county social worker, recalls the death because she knew Lee Dower so well. There was an autopsy which put down the cause of death as acute cardiac insufficiency. That's a fancy way of saying they didn't know exactly what killed him, she said. As more of these refugees started dying in their sleep, people noticed a pattern, and stories about these mysterious killer nightmares started hitting the headlines. It was these news reports that would inspire a young Wes Craven to create one of cinema's most iconic monsters. In an interview he said, "It was a series of articles in the LA Times, 3 small articles about men from Southeast Asia who were from immigrant families and who had died in the middle of nightmares. And the paper never correlated them, never said, hey, we've had another story like this. The third one was the son of a physician. He was about 21. I've subsequently found out that this is a phenomenon in Laos, Cambodia. Everyone in his family said almost exactly these lines, 'You must sleep.' He said, 'No, you don't understand. I've had nightmares before. This is different.' He was given sleeping pills and told to take them, and supposedly he did, but he stayed up. I forget what the total days he stayed up was, but it was a phenomenal amount, something like 6-7 days. Finally, he was watching television with his family and fell asleep on the couch, and everybody said, 'Thank God.' They literally carried him upstairs to bed. He was completely exhausted. Everybody went to bed thinking it was all over. In the middle of the night, they heard screams and crashing. They ran into the room, and by the time they got to him, he was dead. They had an autopsy performed and there was no heart attack. He had just died for unexplained reasons. They found in his closet a Mr. Coffee maker full of hot coffee that he had used to keep awake. They also found all of his sleeping pills that they thought he had taken. He had spit them back out and hidden them. It struck me as such an incredibly dramatic story that I was intrigued by it for a year at least, before finally I thought I should write something down about this kind of situation. It's interesting, if you're familiar with A Nightmare on Elm Street, how much of that story Craven managed to put on the screen. There has been 117 of these kinds of unexplained deaths reported among the Hmong refugee population in America. In all but one of the cases, they were young men with no pre-existing medical conditions that could have caused a sudden death. In one case, a man was rushed to hospital and successfully revived. It was found that he was experiencing ventricular fibrillation. As one doctor put it, the heart muscle was contracting without affecting normal beats, just sort of quivering. Doctors found no sign of any cardiac disease typically associated with heart attacks, so what was the cause? There was a widespread belief among the refugees that the nerve gas used on them during the Vietnam War was the cause of the nightmares and the deaths. This theory was dismissed by medical professionals who questioned why it would have such a delayed effect and only affect young men when thousands of people, men and women, young and old, had all been exposed to the gas. Another popular belief among the Hmong people was that they'd left their ancestor spirits behind in Laos and were unprotected from spiritual attacks. This left them vulnerable and allowed the Da Cho to attack them in their sleep. These nightmare deaths don't just affect the Hmong refugees though. There are similar reports from other communities. In Japan, the phenomenon is known as Pokuri Death Syndrome. In Thailand it's called Lai Tai, and in the Philippines it's known as Bangungut. Same as the Hmong refugees, Pokuri, Lai Tai and Bangungut seem to mainly affect young men. They die suddenly in their sleep for no obvious reason, and it appears to be associated with nightmares and sleep paralysis. The scientific community have named this phenomena SUNS, Sudden Unexpected Nocturnal Death Syndrome, but it seems that they still don't know why it happens or how to prevent it. Calling it Sudden Unexpected Nocturnal Death Syndrome is just a way of lumping together a series of unexplained deaths. It doesn't provide us with any real answers. The fact that it only seems to happen in Asian communities suggests that it could be what is known as a culture-bound syndrome, a pattern of mental illness and abnormal behaviour that is unique to a specific ethnic or cultural population and does not conform to any standard classifications of psychiatric disorders. I don't know about you, but that seems like another way of saying they don't know. Others have suggested that it could be caused by certain diets. Consuming excessive amounts of fish sauce have been posited as a factor. There are some articles that suggest this, again though nothing conclusive has ever been proven. As it stands, nobody really knows what causes these nocturnal deaths, so I guess the dream demon hypothesis is still on the table. To be honest, recalling my own sleep paralysis experience, I can't imagine how people might choke to death or their hearts might stop during such an experience. I remember really feeling like I was gasping for breath. Perhaps this causes more deaths than we realise. Maybe people die suddenly in their sleep and we just don't make the link between the old hag and these mysterious deaths. And so that's part of what inspired Freddy Krueger. There were other influences that Wes Craven drew on, certain life experiences that inspired Freddy's appearance. We talk more about that sort of thing in Proper Horror Shows video. I just wanted to look at the dream demon aspect in my own video, so if you want to know more, go watch the talk that we had on Horror Shows channel. Nightmare on Elm Street is one of my all-time favourite movies. I've seen it dozens of times, so I really enjoyed talking about it. But I actually don't know that much about the director Wes Craven. Luckily, Horror Show is a walking encyclopedia when it comes to that sort of thing, so I learned a lot of interesting stuff, and I think we had a really good discussion. So go check that out. I'll put a link at the end of the video, and I'll put a link in the description and wherever else I can put a link. Thank you for watching, and a big thanks to the patrons who are helping to keep the channel going. It's much appreciated. Until next time, goodbye.
Don't fall